Good morning, Leader.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting, the May meeting of the County Council Executive. So we'll start item 1 then, which is apologies for absence, please.
Thank you. We have apologies from Andy Gutherson, Executive Director for Place.
Thank you. No further. I think all members are present. Item 2, any declarations of councillors' interest, please? I see nobody indicating, so there are none. Item 3 then, which is announcements by the Leader, Executive Councillors and Directors. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Leader. Just to confirm, following announcements in the media at the weekend, as we all know, we have a rather large lifetime event happening this weekend with the coronation of King Charles. The government has announced that as part of the coronation arrangements, there will be a series of new national nature reserves around the UK. There'll be 25 in total to be announced at the rate of 5 per year. Very pleased to confirm that the first of these will be the Lincolnshire Coronation Coast National Nature Reserve, which will be situated on the 2 designations that already exist at Thedlethorpe and Saltfleetby. We expect a formal announcement from Natural England and dedication in the summer period. In addition to that, we are now informed that the National Coastal Path, a large chunk of which goes around the Lincolnshire coast, is to be renamed in the King's Honour, and this is to be fully open around the whole of the UK by the end of next year. I'll report back to the Executive if there are any implications for us in terms of that process. And I think it's probably worth noting, Chairman, that this is an important announcement. It is about the natural environment. Lincolnshire has an enormous amount to offer in terms of our coast and, of course, in terms of all the natural environment sites we have inland as well. So it's a great opportunity for tourism. So whilst Natural England and that part of government is very keen on having a natural environment that is protected and thrives in the future, we do seem to have a conflict of interest going on in government with some of the other proposals that they have for Lincolnshire, whether that be giant pylon lines down the coastline or solar farms that impact on some of our natural environment sites. So government does need to quite clearly get its own house in order to make sure we get the full benefit from these announcements designed to mark the King's coronation. I'll leave it there, Chairman, but report back on any implications for us from these announcements.
Thank you very much. Any further announcements, please? Not seeing any, so we'll move then on to minutes of the meeting of this Executive held on the 7th of March of 2023. Is there a wish I sign those as a true and accurate record? Agreed. Thank you. Then we move on to item 4 then, which is the procurement of the Integrated Sexual Health Service. So, Councillor Burkett.
Thank you. This is to reprocure our sexual health contract. It runs out on the 1st of April 2024, so that's when we are going to reprocure it. We're looking to do a 5-year contract with a 2-year extension. So this is to obviously approve the use of the £500,000 from the Public Health Reserve Fund. So if I pass you over to Derek, and Derek will go through the paper for you and explain this very important service that we run.
Thank you, Councillor Booker. I'll just do the headlines. I'll pass over to Lucy to pull out some of the key points. It's a bit of a daisy chain, I know, but then if there's any questions that the Executive have, we can get into the detail through that route, if that's okay. So open access sexual health services are one of the statutory functions that was transferred from primary care trusts into local authorities in 2013. As a county council, we've been commissioning an integrated service with the Community Health Service Trust, Lincolnshire's Community Health Service Trust, Positive Health Lincolnshire, and GP practices and community pharmacies. It's quite a complicated model as described in the paper. That contract is due to finish on the 31st of March 2024, so we are in the process of reprocuring so that we do discharge our statutory responsibilities. The paper describes that the current service model does perform well. There is a new national specification coming as part of the overall sexual health strategy that we're expecting. And so we've made sure that the service specification that we've developed that's described in this paper meets with that national specification. We've also increased the focus on things like the digital offer, learning from some of the challenges we experienced during COVID, but also making sure that we focus on prevention and health promotion in terms of sexual health services as well. So overall, the revised service seeks to ensure that most sexual health services and contraceptive needs can be met at one site by one health professional, which is what the national specification will be telling us to do. But it also recognises there needs to be lots of different support services across, which is why there are different components to the specification. I'll leave it there. I'll let Lucy pull out just the key points from the paper, because it is quite a detailed paper. And then very happy for Lucy and I to answer any questions that the executive might have.
Thanks, Derek. So our current service is made up of 4 different components. The main integrated sexual health service, our sexual health outreach, GP, long-acting reversible contraception and emergency contraception. And what we've learnt from a range of pre-procurement work that we've done, kind of benchmarking, stakeholder engagement, a service review and demand and financial modelling, is that the current service is performing well, and we've used that intelligence that we've gathered to develop our future delivery model. And as Derek's mentioned, we do now have a national service specification. It's been released, and our proposed future delivery model aligns well to that. We have also proposed some enhancements in the new model. So we've got an enhanced digital offer and a broader self-care platform, but there won't be any significant changes to service delivery, because we know that what we are currently delivering does align well to that national specification. The proposed model includes 3 separate lots. So there's one around the integrated service. There is separate outreach and HIV prevention and separate GP LARC, because what we've done through our market engagement and through kind of talking to various stakeholders, we understand that by being able to work directly with GPs, we should be able to get a better reach and uptake of that GP long-acting reversible contraception offer to complement our integrated service. And following some joint work with North and North East Lincolnshire, we are also proposing to jointly tender based on a set of service specifications. So that will bring some advantages for our local residents, for example, who live close to the borders with North and North East Lincolnshire. The proposed budget for the new service is 4.89 million from 24-25. It's a slight reduction on the current budget of 5.2 million, but we do expect the difference will be met by relevant partners as documented in paragraph 4.6 of the report. And our demand modelling does suggest that this budget is viable. We'll need to monitor it over the life of the contract, obviously in case demand exceeds expectations. And I'm just going to hand over to Carl very briefly to touch on the contract duration and the market engagement.
Thank you, Lucy. So the market engagement showed us there was a fairly limited market of specialist providers interested and capable to deliver the integrated service. And that exercise informed the proposal. So in order to maximise the level of interest and competition in the procurement exercise, a 7-year duration, that's a 5-year initial term plus 2-year potential extension duration, is proposed as representing the most attractive and viable term for the market. Because the cost of estates, and by that I mean the clinical delivery locations, was flagged as something that may present a barrier to potential providers who don't have an established infrastructure in the county, the availability of a mobilisation fund is proposed as something that should increase the attractiveness of the integrated service contract, as should the wider opportunities presented by the greater Lincolnshire approach. Thank you.
I guess just in summary, the recommendations are there. It is quite, I've said it a few times, it is quite a detailed service specification and paper, so I think probably useful just to give some time for questions and answers at this point, if that's okay, Leader.
Councillor Marfleet, so I think it's been to your scrutiny committee, hasn't it?
Yes, we went through it in quite a lot of detail. As I said, it is quite a complicated paper, but it is also a very good service and a good offer, and has been improved as well. We especially like the cross-working across the authorities, because certainly for my area, if you're sort of at Holton the Clay, you're right on the boundary to Grimsby, and Boston is a very long way away. Areas that we did pay a bit of attention and focus was that going forward, we have different ages and generations, and their requirements are quite different throughout. And improved accessibility and knowledge still really remains paramount, so that we sort of really do highlight, especially to the younger fraternity, the sort of where we need to connect better with the digital offer, but they need to know sort of how easy it is to sort of be looked at, seen, or seek information. Otherwise, you end up where you could have sort of you sit in a void, really, because you can't just get on public transport. So in effect, they would have to ask mum and dad to take them somewhere that they might not wanted to have asked in the first place. Other areas was the holiday and the tourist areas. Students, obviously, some of those can have seasonal and sort of slightly higher requirements. Psychosexual health, there's still potentially a need there, and maybe that might be something more going forward. And I suppose the final thing, which really still sits, that we all sort of as a committee did speak on, was that there is still an educational need for schools to, in effect, get behind and just raise awareness. Certainly, you know, when I speak to a lot of the youth today, some of the carryings on that you hear, you do just question, you know, the sort of implications of even having a child, you know, and all of that, and actually the complications and everything else that go with it. So don't just gamble. But all in all, no, we fully support the recommendations, and we recommend approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, questions, comments, please. Yes, Councillor Davies, please, and then Councillor Bradwell.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very detailed report. It makes interesting reading. One of the things I'd like just to explore a little bit more is about the lack of competitiveness in the marketplace. I may not be reading the report right, but it seems to suggest the lack of having facilities and property in the county is a reason that is a barrier to entry to the market. But are not these facilities delivered through public asset? In which case, why is there a barrier, or am I misunderstanding how the service is delivered?
So the service currently in Lincolnshire is delivered by LCHS, the Community Health Trust, and they utilise their existing estates infrastructure to support access to the services at premises around the county. There are because the market is relatively small, with a small number of specialist providers, a number of whom are health trusts operating in other county areas. In order for them to enter the market in Lincolnshire, they're going to need to have estates access, and the estates currently available are LCHS estates. So the mobilisation fund is intended to support potential incoming providers to source suitable accommodation to enable them to provide sufficient access points for the services across the county.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, we're really talking about the free market of the health system here. So what you're saying is LCHS have no obligation to open up their premises to any other providers at all?
That's correct.
Right, okay. So in terms of the £500,000,
do you envisage that being going on rents or refurbishing or buying? What do we know? What kind of how that breaks down roughly?
We'll let Lucy answer.
Yep. Thank you.
So it could be, but also, so it could be around things like rent, but also potentially there may be some need for kind of renovation or developing property so that it's suitable for the delivery of clinical services. So there are specific standards that would need to be met in kind of consultation rooms and things like that. So to make sure that we've got good coverage across the county, we would want the 500,000 to be available to enable effectively buildings and clinical space to be built up, to be brought up to the standards required, and then that would then be used for delivery throughout the life of the contract.
Just to add to that, I think the key point here is that a lot of the services that are delivered are quite clinical without going into the detail, and there is also the requirement to meet CQC regulations, which is about the standard of the estate within which that's delivered. It wouldn't preclude somebody else coming into the market, and in fact the 500,000 suggestion came from the market to allow that possibility. If we didn't have that, I think we constrain our opportunities even further to existing NHS providers and premises.
Very quickly, yeah, I mean, that's eminently sensible. I just wonder, at the end of the contract period, are we awarding this money as a grant or is it a joint investment? For example, they buy a house, a property in the Avenue, for example, and convert it, and I appreciate that could be quite expensive. Do we have any tie or charge on that property, or are we literally giving it as a grant and just assuring ourselves that it's being spent correctly and not just being carved off?
Yeah, so it would be in effect to ensure that the premises were up to the standard required for CQC and clinical service delivery, so we wouldn't have any call on the estate, and it would be NHS and therefore Crown estate generally anyway, overall, assuming that an NHS organisation wins the contract or wins a chunk of the contract, would be my understanding of it. We can check with legal, but I don't think there would be that opportunity.
Playing devil's advocate slightly, you know, you could go, well, yes, I'm going to spend £500,000 on the building, honest gov. That's what it's cost me, funnily enough, exactly the same amount of the grant. You know, what are we checking? I assume there will be some, but also I'd be interested to know if and it's frustrating, isn't it? Because they can use Crown property privileges to hold back the property from us, but they don't seem to have to open it up to each other. I find that quite frustrating because we know, for example, theoretically, there are clinical facilities in Lincolnshire that could be used as of tomorrow because they're being used today. I'm surprised that there isn't an obligation to share these premises because we are talking about the public sector, aren't we? We're not, from what you seem to be suggesting, is it's not somebody buying an office and converting it, is taking something else that's already used in NHS facilities and transferred across. That I'm sure it's the best way of doing it, but it doesn't seem a good use of public money.
I'll pass over to Carl to talk about the detail there, but I think the point about ensuring that if a new provider or the provider that wins a contract is using the money for what we've asked them to use the money for, we will absolutely make sure that is the case, and we'll happily bring that back to scrutiny and executive just to demonstrate that. That's not a problem. The wider issue about NHS estate is a whole separate debate, but Carl can answer about the commercial aspect where we were asked about looking at this funding.
Yeah, so we will absolutely require full transparency at the point of tender. We'll need them to disclose what their proposals are for the utilisation of the mobilisation funding, what their proposal is to identify and develop, make suitable for fit for purpose the premises that they're proposing to use for service delivery. That wouldn't preclude them working with existing NHS and or other clinical service providers in the county to access existing services and thus bring down the burden of reliance on the mobilisation fund that's being made available, and that will be factored into the evaluation of the tenders as part of the overall awarded contracts.
Yeah, just on that, obviously we have basically got one provider at the moment, haven't we? And I understand the need. So as obviously quality, you're very satisfied with the quality of the service. So there's not much about value for money or any work you've done in terms of comparing costs elsewhere, and also in terms of, I suppose, expanded out to moving forward ICS, integrated care services. You know, I mean, although it's doing it is probably not the best way just to have one provider, and I understand, but I'm just questioning it. Are you confident that we're getting the public are getting the best value they can out of it? And then with the integrated care services, it should be possible to you know, do something more collectively across the piece.
I'll start the answer, and then Lucy can fill in any of the details. So overarching, it's not one overarching provider. The new model is for an integrated sexual health service that will provide the majority of the GU and contraception, including now managing the emergency contraception part of it, which in the current model is separate. So we're bringing those two bits together. We've got the Lincolnshire Sexual Health Outreach, HIV prevention and support services. That's a separate component. And then we've got the long-acting reversible contraception, which is delivered by GP practices. So there's three parts to it. In terms of what we could and longer term might be able to do as part of the integrated care development, we would absolutely be looking at that. Where we fit on the benchmarking is that if we take out the 300,000 that is described in the paper, we're actually absolutely in the middle of the pack for our peer group in terms of cost and outcomes. So we're in the right place. At the moment, there's that £300,000 that Lucy mentioned at the beginning that we are in conversations with our NHS partners about to make sure that they are funding that and we aren't. That is a very clear position that we're holding, and we will take that forwards. I'm having a conversation with the Integrated Care Board lead about that on Friday. So that will take some of the money out, and that puts us absolutely benchmarking-wise right in the middle. In terms of overall sexual health services and, for example, the avoidance of teenage pregnancy, all the evidence suggests that at an NHS level, every pound you spend gets the NHS about £1.40 in the first year by avoiding an unwanted teenage pregnancy. From a wider system perspective, which is where the local authority would be, it takes a bit longer, but we get a return on investment over a 5-year period, and over a 10-year period is a very significant return on investment. So the provision of integrated sexual health services is not only the right thing to do for the people of Lincolnshire and is a statutory responsibility of the council, it also is a cost-saving intervention. There's very few NHS interventions that save money. This is one of them.
And just to add that we have ongoing conversations with the Integrated Care Board as well around ways that we can work more closely together to around things like contraception. So there are a range of contraception that are offered through the sexual health service, but contraception is also used for other areas of clinical practice. And so we're working closely with the ICB to basically to make sure that we join that up and together as we move forward have the availability of contraception wherever somebody turns up for it, whatever they need it for. So there are areas of practice where we're trying to join up with the ICB to make sure that we've got as broad and accessible offer as possible, and a lot of that does come through general practice.
Okay, in terms of timeliness of accessibility to treatment services, obviously we know the NHS massive problem there. So what's the quality of that with this current contract, and what are you expecting the providers to deliver in future?
So at the moment, access is quick. So people can either directly approach the sexual health service for an appointment, and they would be kind of triaged and supported. Also, the availability of online testing has meant that people can request kits to their own home, so that's really helped as well with timeliness of kind of testing, diagnosis, and then onward care. And we are working really closely with general practice. So pre-pandemic, we had a really good availability of contraception services through general practice. That's one of the things that was less available during the pandemic, as general practice was kind of diverted to work in other areas, and our integrated sexual health services picked up a lot of that work. We're now starting to see the balance redress so that we've got more availability through general practice, which is more convenient for local local residents because they can access the service closer to home. But we are working with general practice to increase that accessibility so that it's quick and locally available.
So when you say working with general practice, is there an expectation that, because most people say, well, I might get an appointment 3 weeks' time in certain areas of certain practices, so what expectation on the GPs to be responsive quickly?
Yeah, if members look at the paper under 3.3, we've got the key performance indicators there. So we've got access to GUM services, HIV testing, chlamydia positivity rates and LARC update. And you'll see there that 99% of new clients with sexually transmitted infection needs are being offered an appointment within 2 working days, whereas the target's 98%. So we are looking at virtually 100%. There's always going to be a little bit there. And in terms of long-acting reversible contraception, which is delivered through GP practices, we're averaging about 46%, 22-23 today, where the target's 37%. So it's outperforming. Obviously, we want to keep pushing and getting those response times as quick as possible. But given the other pressures that the primary care are under, they are outperforming the current contract. So there's no reason to think that would go the wrong way, and we're pushing them to get even faster.
Just so, Margaret, so if what do the patients pay for? I presume they're not on benefits. Is this all of this free for the actual treatment itself? Not
yeah, it's an NHS service, so it's universal, free at the point of care. Okay. So there is no cost. I'm trying to think if there's any aspect of it that would ever be. I don't think there is there? I don't think so. Not even the HC.
If not for our relevant.
Not for our relevant.
Okay, and in terms of the private sector, private clinics, how does that work in terms of opportunities for, say, the private sector can do it better and cheaper? There is an access for them to enter the market.
My assumption would be they could bid for the contract, and we would assess it in the same way that we would assess anybody who bid for the contract.
Yeah, well, I'll just come back on that. This used to be my responsibility many years ago, but it is very difficult. We've been through the contracts before, and it is really, we've had just the NHS, haven't we? And it'd be interesting to see. I agree with you, Leader, that actually bringing private sector, private healthcare or something into the equation would be very beneficial, because it would give the NHS something to, we'd be able to sort of test them between them about how efficient they were. But for me, I think the paper and actually reaching out to try and get other providers in other parts of the county is really key. And I understand what we're saying, we have to use NHS premises or whatever. But, you know, our county is one of the largest rural counties in the country, and it is a problem. It is a barrier sometimes, because a lot of places haven't got buses, and you know, if someone's got to try and get somewhere, so I'd be really interested to see how that works out, because for me, I think we should try to spread the service as far as possible, because you know, it is a necessary service sometimes for people, and I think it should be more available. But I do understand the problems we have, because we have to have a fit-for-purpose room or building to deliver the service from sometimes. But, you know, I was really pleased to see that's there. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's following on from Councillor Bradwell. Under 2.3.5, the long-acting reversible contraception, it mentions that we have contracts with 64 GP practices, so we're not actually covering the whole of the county. I assume that there isn't an obligation for all GP practices to cover this service, but can we be assured that with the GPs grouping into the primary care networks that we have got coverage overall? And on that same topic, can I just, on that, it's the last sort of sentence, and I quote, and LCC is recharged by the ICS for the LARC device costs. Should that be the ICB? Because we are actually part of the ICS, aren't we? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It should be ICB, so apologies for that. We'll make sure that we correct that. In terms of access to long-acting reversible contraception, there's a couple of things to balance out. 64 GP practices are about the spread currently across the county. It is a specialist skill, and therefore we need to ensure that the people who are delivering that service are trained and maintain that specification. As we go out to market and then we assess, we will be looking at the coverage of LARC and in fact that all of the services, and how an incumbent new provider or the existing provider will change their service delivery model to improve access. Some of that could be about the spread of the physical locations. Some of that will be around the focus that we've got in the specification about more digital support and access, and changing the service delivery model that way as well. And all of that will be factored into whoever wins the contract overall.
It could be an outreach service rather than the building going to the person who goes to the building. Okay, that's great. Yes, Councillor Troy.
Thank you. There's sort of two questions. It says about increased focus on development the digital offer, and I just wondered, will that be branded LCC, NHS? I just wondered how that goes out to the general public. And secondly, it's really following on from the property side and the building side, and it does seem that if a new bidder was to have to develop and upgrade properties, then does that not put them at a disadvantage compared to someone that's already got them? I think Richard was basically touching on that as well, really. But that does seem, and it sort of seems that every 5 to 7 years we're funding redevelopment of buildings, and I can't help but think, should we not have that in our own buildings, or look at a different way going forward?
Thank you. I think the answer to both those questions lies within the brand, if you like, of the NHS when it comes to sexual health service provision. Councillor Marfleet mentioned it earlier. There will be, and there is, an ongoing challenge with how services are branded to make them accessible, especially to younger people, where they know that, and they feel, whether they know or they feel, that they will get non-judgmental support and advice, including clinical intervention. So at the moment, if you look on the Lincolnshire Sexual Health website, which I've got open at the moment, it is very much a corporate branding linked to the NHS because of that important trusted source. I'm not saying the council isn't a trusted source, but the council is not recognised at the moment to operate within this space. So that's always going to be a balance, I think. Clearly, we can look at what the bidders put in and how they would brand it. Do you know?
That branding will continue as well.
The LISH branding will continue. Right, okay. So that's the proposal, is the LISH branding will continue. Thanks. So it's the
service is branded as the Lincolnshire Integrated Sexual Health Service rather than branded as the provider.
Yeah, there's plenty. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I understand the point of encouraging people to access to be non-judgmental, which is obviously a big thing for youth, especially today. So just a question of while they're there, what advice and support you can give in terms of lifestyle. Presumably that isn't part of the expectation, even if the advice isn't received properly.
So in terms of sexual health behaviours, absolutely that's a core part of the advice and specification. I think there is, and we're having this conversation this morning, there's a need to work more closely with our NHS partners to make sure that they are providing more wraparound advice and support, that they are aware of the huge range of different services that are out there that aren't necessarily directly clinical, because there might be some other issues for people who find themselves in front of or needing support from sexual health services, that we need to make sure that the providers link into whichever services they are. There may be other NHS services, there may be other council services, there may be wider third sector services, and certainly that's one of the things we'll be building into the approach.
Thank you. Any further questions, please? Not seeing any. Okay, then I'll move on back to page 16, where there are 7 recommendations there, which I won't read them all out, but you can read them for yourselves, and I'm sure you already have done. So all those in favour of those recommendations, please now show. I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much. So that is carried. Thank you very much for your attendance and interesting explanation of a very important but quite complicated area of health. So that concludes that paper and also concludes the meeting, and thank you for your attendance.